All right, good afternoon. This is for Deji. The Secretary General is in Baghdad. If you wait long enough, your story's going to be right. Sorry, didn't mean to pull your leg. It's for your colleagues. The Secretary General
Thank you
is
for that.
yeah, sorry, is in Baghdad, where a few moments ago he held a press conference. He said that when he visited Iraq 6 years ago, the war against Daesh was still raging, and that his visit was one of solidarity in a moment of urgency. Today, it is a visit of hope for the future of Iraq, he said, adding that with a new government in place, there is a window of opportunity for progress. His full remarks will be shared with you shortly. Earlier today, he met with various high-level officials, including the Prime Minister, the Foreign Minister, the President, among others. In a joint press encounter with Prime Minister al-Sudani, the Secretary General reiterated that his visit to Iraq was to underscore the commitment of the United Nations to advance peace, human rights, and sustainable development for all Iraqis. We recognize that the challenges Iraq is facing did not arise overnight, he said. They're all the product of decades of oppression, of war, of terrorism, of sectarianism, and foreign interference, adding that no one can expect these challenges to be resolved overnight. He also heard from representatives of women's group and youth groups who voiced their views on the need for further increased participation of women and youth in the country's civic spaces, and also aired their various concerns, including on youth unemployment and climate change. Tomorrow, the Secretary General will be going to a camp for displaced people in the northern part of the country. He's expected to meet with residents and to have a first-hand look at the work that UN agencies are doing there. In the afternoon, he will head to Erbil and meet with various officials from the Kurdistan regional government. This morning, the UN's legal counsel, Miguel de Serpa Suarez, delivered a statement on the Secretary General's behalf to the conference that is being held under the Convention of the Law of the Sea concerning the sustainable use of marine biological diversity. In that statement, the Secretary General says the impacts of climate change, of biodiversity loss, and pollution are being keenly felt around the globe, impacting our environment, our livelihoods, and our lives. The treaty being considered now, he says, can ensure the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity over 2/3 of our life-sustaining ocean space, and it can help guarantee that marine genetics resources are accessed and utilized for the benefit of all humanity. The Secretary General told the delegates that with flexibility and perseverance, they can secure an outcome to help ensure our ocean will be healthier, more resilient, and more productive, benefiting from our planet, benefiting for all humankind and the planet. Turning to Türkiye, we, along with our partners, are continuing to support the government's response. The World Food Program has provided 5 million food packages and hot meals, hundreds of thousands of blankets, bed sheets, tents, including mattresses and tarpaulin, have been provided by the International Organization for Migration, UNHCR, UNICEF, the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Other partners have also provided hundreds of thousands of hygiene, maternity, and dignity kits. Turning to Syria, today 45 truckloads of vital aid from WFP, the World Health Organization, UNHCR, and the International Organization for Migration crossed into northwest Syria. In total, 501 trucks have crossed since February 9th. And as of yesterday, February 28th, we'd also carried out 15 cross-border missions to northwest Syria since the first interagency visit to Idlib on the 14th of February. These have enabled meetings with local partners, affected communities, as well as technical and needs assessments. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us they're continuing to scale up the response, but a lack of funding is hampering their efforts. So far, 30,000 people have received tents and 80,000 have received emergency non-food items. 300,000 people have received ready-to-eat food rations since the beginning of the earthquake response. Cash remains critical to our ability to scale up needs. As of today, the flash appeal for Syria is 43% funded, having received more than $171 million, which is good, but we need more. Turning to Ethiopia, we, along with our partners and the government, launched an appeal for nearly $4 billion to reach more than 20 million people in Ethiopia this year with critical assistance, including food, nutrition support, health services, and other vital aid. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that the southern and eastern regions of Ethiopia continue to suffer the impact of the devastating drought we've been talking about here quite a bit, which some of these areas continue to face cholera outbreaks with 1,100 cases recorded to date. In recent weeks, tens of thousands of people have fled violence in Somaliland to the Somali region. And in northern Ethiopia, humanitarian access continues to improve following the agreement on cessation of hostilities. While a few areas remain hard to reach, we, along with NGOs and government and the NGO partners and the government, have brought in more than 4,400 trucks of loads of aid supplies into the Tigray since mid-November, carrying nearly 180,000 tons of food and other aid supplies. But this assistance needs to be sustained. More than 8.5 million people are currently targeted for food assistance across Afar, Amhara, and Tigray. In Madagascar, we are also continuing to support the government to help people impacted by Tropical Cyclone Freddy. At least 226,000 people were impacted, including 150,000 who are in need of humanitarian assistance. The number of people displaced by the cyclone has increased to nearly 38,000, according to the authorities. Hundreds of schools have been damaged, as well as health centers. So far, the World Food Program has provided more than 53,000 hot meals in 56 shelters. To help people recover from the disaster, WFP will be providing cash-based transfer to nearly 100,000 people and food assistance to about 30,000 in the next 6 months. For its part, WHO has shipped medicine to health centers, while UNICEF has sent emergency school kits, safe drinking water to impacted regions. More than 70,000 children are currently out of school. UNICEF and the UN Population Fund are also providing psychosocial support for displaced families and are working on how to report and respond to any cases of sexual exploitation and abuse. OCHA has allocated $100,000 to support the UN Humanitarian Air Service to help the air service and fly things around. Quick note from the peacekeeping mission in Abyei, where we don't hear from too often. Today, the mission there condemned the movement of armed elements within the southern part of the so-called Abyei box that took place yesterday. While the armed elements remain visible, the mission is deeply worried that this latest development within the southern part of Abyei will further aggravate the conflict in the area and cause untold suffering and humanitarian concerns for civilians in the area. The mission noted that the Abyei box remains a weapons-free area that should not have had the presence of any force, either conventional or armed elements from both communities. It is therefore important that all respect Security Council resolutions in this regard. UNISFA condemned the renewed fighting within and around the borders of the box and urged all parties to cease to a ceasefire and allow the political process to resolve lingering crisis. They stress that it is against any form of unauthorized deployment within that area. And from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, clashes between the Congolese army and the M23 are continuing some 25 to 70 kilometers northwest of Goma. The head of our peacekeeping mission there, Bintou Keita, is currently in the eastern part of the country. She met with the Tory military governor today, who had requested the peacekeeping mission's support to continue building the capacity of Congolese security forces. Earlier this week, she met with the North Kivu military governor and members of the Provincial Security Committee to strengthen cooperation and to address security challenges. Ms. Keita also engaged with civil society representatives and women leaders facing challenges in their communities. And just a note out of Mali, where the peacekeeping mission there today paid tribute to the 3 blue helmets soldiers from Senegal who died last week when their convoy hit an improvised explosive device. Staff Sergeant Eugène Mingu, Corporal Ousseynou Diallo, and Private First Class Pierre Bouban deployed to Mali in September of 2022 in the Ogosagu base. The base had been established in the aftermath of two attacks that killed around 200 civilians in 2019 and 2020. Two of the fallen peacekeepers had served under the UN flag in Liberia, in Sudan, and Cote d'Ivoire. The head of the peacekeeping mission in Mali, El Gassimwane, noted that their service illustrated the courage and devotion of peacekeepers. And the UN team in Lebanon, led by the UN resident coordinator, Imran Riza, is working with authorities and partners to combat the spread of cholera in the country, already plagued by severe economic and financial crisis. There's been more than 6,500 suspected or confirmed cases of cholera and 23 associated deaths since the first case was reported 5 months ago. The UN Central Emergency Fund and the Lebanese Humanitarian Fund together have allocated $9.5 million to prevent the spread of cholera, targeting more than 1.5 million people across Lebanon, including refugees from Syria and Palestine. With the support of WHO and the International Coordination Group, as of 15 February, a total of 1.1 million oral cholera vaccines have been administered, and the vaccination campaign began in mid of November and reached over 90% of coverage by the end of last year. Two important days today. Today is Zero Discrimination Day. Under the theme Save Lives, Decriminalize, the joint UN program on HIV/AIDS, otherwise known as UNAIDS, is highlighting how discrimination of key populations and people living with HIV saves lives and helps advance the end of the AIDS pandemic. Today, it is also the first World Seagrass Day. Despite its important contribution to sustainable development and climate change mitigation and adaptation, seagrasses are in danger, and only about a quarter of all seagrass meadows fall under marine protection areas. Most recent census estimates that 7% of this key marine habitat is being lost worldwide every year. And as you know, the permanent representative of Mozambique will be here as soon as you let me go. Deji, if you have a question, you get to ask, because I picked on you. Okay, Maggie and then Edie.
Stéphane, the Taliban Ministry of Education said today that universities will reopen after the winter break in 5 days, but only for male students. Any reaction?
I would echo the words of Ramiz yesterday, is that every woman, every girl in Afghanistan needs to be given their right to an education, their right to live freely, and their right to live their dreams and live their lives free of any restriction. Edie.
Thank you, Steph. Does the Secretary General have any reaction to the announcement of the winner of the election for president in Nigeria?
You know, we've seen the press reports. We've also seen the reports that a number of the other candidates would contest. If I read those reports, properly, what is important is that, as in any election, if any candidate or group of candidates have an issue with the results, that they go through the established legal and constitutional channels to work out their challenges, and it is very important for everyone to remain calm as that process or these processes play out.
And a second question. The Israeli police have cracked down on protesters against the judicial reforms that the Netanyahu government is trying to implement. Do you have any reaction to this?
It's, our standard line is that people everywhere have a right to demonstrate peacefully, and authorities have a responsibility to ensure that that right is respected and that people are able to express themselves freely. Abdelhamid, you may express yourself freely.
Thank you. I have a similar question, but I have a second question. But my similar question is that the PA police also, the security men, stormed a press conference held by Palestinian opposition to the Oslo Accords in Ramallah. Then they moved to Watan TV, and they also blocked the TV, not allowing them to enter Watan TV. Do you have any comment?
The answer is the same. Whether people are in anywhere in the world, journalists have a right to express themselves freely. People have a right to express themselves freely, free of having a press conference shut down, free of having a peaceful march shut down. Freedom of expression is a bedrock of the world we would like to live in.
My second question, Stéphane, in his speech to the Human Rights Council, the Secretary General mentioned in that part in French a few reports issued by the Human Rights Council. He gave those examples. He spoke about Myanmar, Afghanistan, Xinjiang in China, Tigray in Ethiopia, but he did not mention that important report issued by the Council on Palestine, which was debated in the GA, and the Israeli ambassador got mad. He cut it into pieces, threw it in the faces of the attendants. Is that coincidence to forget mentioning this important report?
He just a number of country thematic examples were picked out. I think if he had listed every report, I think the speech would still be going on now. The Secretary General has not been shy in any way in expressing his position on the situation in Palestine. He did so in front of the Committee on the Inalienable Rights of the Palestinian People just a few days ago. It was mentioned in the speech. It's been mentioned in General Assembly speeches. So I think we were just picking out a number of examples. I don't think there's anything to be read into what was said or what was not said. Celia.
Thank you, Stéphane. So last week, the Chinese presented the plan for peace in Ukraine. Has the Secretary General has received any petition, or is any office of good offices been involved in trying to put this in motion? We know that Lukashenko met with the leader of China, and they spoke about the possibility of moving forward with this.
I mean, we've seen the peace plan. I think I reacted to it on the 24th, saying that it was obviously an important contribution, especially the issue of the nuclear, on non-use of nuclear weapons, on the Black Sea Grain initiative. I think we all have a collective responsibility to do what we can to bring this conflict to a peace, a just peace, aligned with the Charter and international law. On the issue of good offices, as we've been saying since the beginning, the Secretary General's good offices are available to any parties that are in tension or in conflict, given if both parties are bring their issue to the Secretary General.
So far, China has not reach out, or is communication with China?
I'm not aware of any official démarche from the Chinese mission here towards the Secretary General on this particular issue. Madam.
Thank you. Still on the Nigerian elections. In my last interview with you, you said the UNDP supported the INEC, that's the Nigeria Electoral Commission, to use technology to manage the elections. But it turned out that the INEC didn't use a technology that's meant for it, that's the biometric voter accreditation system to transmit the result of the elections. Would you say your support in this regard was fruitful?
Look, we As I mentioned to you, UNDP offered technical support to the election. We're not an observer on these elections. It is not for the UN to say yay or nay on how the elections were run. Nigeria, I think, has a very strong and proud democratic history of peaceful transition of power in recent years. There is a process ongoing. It is important at this point in any election, in any country, and we've seen it in the north, we've seen it in the south, and east and west. We've seen issues of great tension following elections when people didn't accept the results. It is important that all stakeholders work for the better for the stability of the country and use existing legal and constitutional channels to challenge, if they so wish, any electoral results.
Okay, secondly, there are reports of election-related violence in some states in Nigeria, especially the killings of 10 law enforcement agents and personnel. So what's the reaction of the Secretary General to this?
We clearly condemn any violence, especially in an electoral period. I mean, we condemn violence across the board. It is incumbent on political parties, on civic leaders, to work to avoid any violence, to avoid any inflammatory speech. And again, this applies to any electoral process. Dulcie, and then Yvonne.
Yeah, I just wanted to get to the idea of why the Secretary General went to Iraq. What is the overarching goal? Why Iraq? Why now? Thanks.
Well, we've had a political mission in Iraq. We have a political mission. The UN has a long history of involvement in Iraq through thick and thin. The Secretary General, both in on a personal level in terms of his history as High Commissioner for Refugees, has spent a lot of time in that part of the world. He believes, given the political situation now in Iraq, it was an opportune time for a visit of solidarity to encourage the solidification of the democratic institutions in Iraq, to also show support on how Iraq, as opposed to a number of countries that face less challenging circumstances, have brought people home from camps in different parts of the region. And obviously, as always with the Secretary General's travels, it's also a matter of calendar. He'd long been scheduled to be in the region for the conference on least developing countries, which took place in Doha. Yvonne, and then we'll go back to Maggie.
Thank you, Stéphane. What is the Secretary General's reaction to the words of the FBI director here in the US today, suggesting that the FBI believes that the COVID-19 pandemic may have originated in a laboratory in Wuhan, China?
We've seen those reports. I would, and we have no particular information or intelligence on that, because it's not something it's not within the Secretary General's mandate. The WHO has been involved in these issues. Their scientific advisory group on the origins of what they call novel pathogens is continuing to examine all available scientific evidence that would help advance the knowledge on the origin of SARS-2. It's important, and I think WHO has been very clear. WHO's calls on China and the scientific community to undertake the necessary studies in that direction. And then I think for WHO, until they have more evidence, all hypotheses remain on the table. Margaret.
The U.S. ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, was testifying on the Hill this morning, and she was asked by one of the congressmen about UN use of Russian military equipment in peacekeeping operations, and how much money is spent on that, because apparently there's some U.S. bill saying the U.S. cannot fund Russian military equipment here. Can you get us some information on what equipment the UN gets from Russia? I
Well,
recall
I mean,
helicopters, but I don't know
Yeah, I
what
mean, I don't
else.
know what they're
And the cost.
what they're referring to as military equipment. We have in a number of places through a bidding process have used Russian commercial assets for aviation purposes and transport purposes. I would not call them military items, but I will try to get you more detail on that.
So is that all Russia gives peacekeeping?
It's not
Not
a,
gives,
no, no,
it's
I
a
mean, it's not,
commercial
right. I mean, this
transaction.
goes through a bidding process. We have a procurement process, which is clear and transparent, and the bids accepted. Russia is not the only country that through a procurement process has, through which, let me rephrase that, it is not the only country from which our procurement process gets aviation assets for our peacekeeping missions and political missions.
Can you ask DPKO to send us down some more info?
I can ask. I'm
Thank you.
always happy to ask
If
people.
you're listening.
Yeah, exactly. You ask me, I ask them. Ephraim, yes.
Thank you. In Baghdad, the Secretary General commended the Iraqi authorities for repatriating their own citizens from Al-Hol camp. What is his message to the countries, especially European countries, who are still refusing to do the same? And how often would you say does he bring this issue up with them?
The message is exactly that to other countries is do the same, right? These, the people who have stayed in camps, especially Al-Hol, are living in horrific conditions, are suffering further human rights violations. It is brought up a number of occasions, not only by the Secretary General, but his senior colleagues, Mr. Voronkov and others. I'm going to self-release to let the permanent representative of Mozambique.
What does that mean?
That means I'm leaving whether you like it or not. Yeah.
Out of here.
I'm out of here. Yeah. In the gutter.